guys. So people are starting to come on. So before Tina and I start, of course, I'm going to give my normal spiel, and that is, you guys, remember that I'm not your attorney, that if you want to retain an attorney and have an attorney-client relationship, you have to enter into a fee agreement with them. You probably have to pay them money, but I am not your attorney. This is for educational purposes only. You have to abide by the rules in your jurisdiction, wherever that is. You have to abide by your state laws, by your local rules, by the case law. I'm only licensed in Arizona. The information that I'm giving is for educational purposes, and it's based on my experience. I can't guarantee results. So with that said, you guys, I want to welcome our very special guest. We've been talking about her for a few weeks, and that's Tina Swithin. Hi, Tina. Welcome.
Hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us.
Tina, I'm so happy to have you here because every week I get so many questions about people who are dealing with an ex or soon to be ex who has narcissistic personality disorder. And I know you're the expert.
There's a lot of them out there.
There are. So I thought, you know what? Let's get the lady who knows all about that on the show. And so just for those of you who are on right now, let me give you a little bit of background about Tina if you don't know her already. I know that she's already out in the world and doing a lot of great things, but if you don't know Tina, she's the founder of a group called When Moms Battle, and Tina's going to tell us a little more about that during the show. She's the author of a bunch of books. It's so impressive, and you can find all of them on Amazon. The books include Divorcing a Narcissist, One Mom's Battle, Divorcing a Narcissist, Advice from the Battlefield, Divorcing a Narcissist, Rebuilding After the Storm, the Narc Decoder, which sounds very intriguing, and Lemonade Life, a journal. And Tina has, groups that she facilitates, and she's on the board of directors, and that she helps people in her groups navigate through these relationships, and also helps them with rebuilding their lives after the relationship is over. So Tina, again, thank you and welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
Can you tell me, Tina, when did your journey on this road with the narcissist start? And how did you end up where you are today?
Sure. So back in 2008, I sat down on a therapist's couch and was trying to make sense of my marriage. At the time, I told my husband, I'm ready to walk out. I just can't do this anymore. And there had been a series of events, financial events, that had transpired quite significantly, to where I found out we were $1.6 million in debt. And most of that was done behind my back. We were living in a gated community. We had this lifestyle that was very much a facade. However, I didn't realize how much of a facade it was at the time. We were very much the all-American golden couple of our community, and people looked up to us. And so I was sitting on my therapist's couch explaining, I am married and I'm with this person, but I've never felt so alone in my life. And I couldn't really make sense of everything that was happening and everything that had transpired over our 9-year relationship. Very much in a fog, as I now know what it would be called. And she walked across the room, brought back a book. Now I know it was a DSM, and she pointed out a little area, wanted me to read it out loud. And it was Narcissistic Personality Disorder. And as I read it, the fixer in me actually got really excited, because it was finally a label to make sense of what I was living. And I thought, gosh, if I have an explanation for this, we can fix it. Because that, true to my nature, I used to be a fixer. I am no longer that way. My marriage, she basically told me at the time, you can either accept that this is your life, or, you leave, because he will never change. I didn't want to believe that. I lasted another 6 months, and then the relationship came to an end. So our divorce started in August of 2009, and I am someone who avoids conflict at all costs. So the naive part of me was thinking, this is going to be easy. We're just not meant to be together and we're going to co-parent. And I was actually excited because he had never really parented my daughters before. And so I thought he's going to step up to the plate. He's going to have to. And he's going to be a dad. And that's not really what happened.
So what happened?
So our divorce, when it was filed in August of 2009, turned into what I call a Category 5 divorce hurricane. I didn't even know who I had been married to. I didn't recognize this person. When I read his court declarations, I did not know who he was describing. When I read these things, it was like something out of a novel. It was not me. I truly didn't recognize the person he was talking about. And it was terrifying because of the severe financial abuse that I had been subjected to, not only in the marriage, but then once I walked away from the marriage, I was not able to hire an attorney. I was forced to represent myself, and he had attorneys all along his journey. And so I immediately knew from the day he filed that things had changed and that I was now the target of a major attack. And his goal was to win and to control me. When the relationship ended, he had, now in hindsight, I can see, he lost so much control and power that his absolute goal was to win, was to hurt me, and was to control me. And he knew that my children were the way to do that. So that's how our divorce started out, and was his goal from start to finish.
So, the work that I do is helping people who are representing themselves in the family law courtroom in custody cases. Mostly that's what I focus upon, although my material does help people who are just going through divorce without children. So what did you do? How did you find the strength to keep going, learning this stuff on your own and doing this stuff on your own when you didn't know the law? And so you're trying to deal with your children and their emotions and protecting them. Then you have whatever you're going through personally, and then you're being a lawyer. So, what did you do? How did you do it?
At the time, it was truly survival mode. I wish I could look back and say, these are the exact steps. For me, it was, that first day I walked into the courtroom, I looked like a deer in headlights. I'm sure I did. I had no idea what I was doing. I'm truly thankful that my area, I live in San Luis Obispo, California. They seem to be friendly to people who are self-representing. Some areas are not. But one of the first things I did was I would go to court. I would go sit in the courtroom when it was not my case, because I found that I was not emotionally triggered by the cases, the stories. It wasn't about my kids. So really being in the courtroom and observing other cases, but more importantly, observing how attorneys spoke to the judges, how the judges reacted to certain things. One of the things I learned very early on is that, if I'm in courtroom A, I would present my case one way, but if I'm right next door in courtroom B, that judge may bring different biases to the table, and they rule completely differently, different personalities. As much as we like to think that they leave all of that behind, they're humans and they bring different things to the table. And so for me, it was really observing and watching courtroom procedures, watching how attorneys presented things that may line up with what I was going through at the time, hearing about different case law that I could use and reference. It was a learning experience, and I put myself right in the mix of it and sat in and watched. And, if I was sitting in a courtroom and there was another case that maybe had some similarities to mine, I would follow that parent out of the courtroom and say, hey, my name's Tina. I think we have a lot in common, and I would love to take you to coffee. That was all I could afford at the time. But it was incredibly helpful. And, I always say if I could give people one piece of advice, it's get to know your local court system and the laws and procedures and, the different judges.
Okay, that's fantastic advice. I love that, Tina. And I just want to tell you on the live stream, people are giving you prayer hands and they're saying
Aww.
hashtag Mama Bear. They're saying we love you, Mom Heroes. So that's awesome. And, we have a comment by Our Brand that says courts and an empath's heart are a narcissist's playground. How do you...
Absolutely.
Yeah, you agree with that comment?
Yeah, one of the things I talk about, I've been doing a big push lately on something called what I refer to as post-separation abuse. And I always say, the abuse I suffered during the relationship was nothing, compared to what I suffered once that court paperwork was filed. And it's, in the domestic violence world, we learn about physical abuse, we learn about verbal abuse, but the realities of the abuse that happens once the divorce is final or once you leave the relationship, there's a whole different avenue of abuse. And one of the avenues is legal abuse. And, they see this as their playground to where you are at their mercy, and they use it, depending on what type of high conflict individual or narcissist you're up against. Some of them thrive with that stage of the court. And most of us, the targets of this type of individual, it's not our strong suit, and emotions are involved because we actually have emotions, unlike a narcissist, or feelings, or, we're truly in this for our kids. And it's a selfless role, but do they take advantage of that? Absolutely.
So, and I was browsing I've been browsing your Instagram feed over the last few weeks since, we decided that you were going to come on the show, and I've noticed that you have a series going on recently that you're doing about, is it the post-separation abuse? Is that what you call it?
Yes.
And I think today you posted about legal abuse. It says using the family court system as a weapon to destroy the healthy parent, malicious intimidation, false narratives, and lies results in financial devastation.
Right.
So how is there a way, I mean, I'm sure that you could talk for eons about this and give trainings on this, but
right.
If you could give somebody a tip about how to even begin to deal with the person who is engaging in legal abuse, what would that be? And I don't know if you can.
Yeah, it's my opinion from sitting in, now what I do a lot of the time is I go to court with moms and some dads too, but I find that most of my clientele tends to be moms. I sit in the courtroom a lot, 1 to 2 times a week at minimum. And, what I have found is that the courts really give people a grace period. Once the divorce starts, it's typically a year, maybe 2 years, where they expect there to be a lot of conflict. You're there for a reason. You don't like each other. And once it goes past that 1 to 2 year mark, depending on the judge, that's where they really start paying attention and saying, okay, this is beyond the normal custody battle or beyond the normal divorce. There's a problem, maybe it's both people, maybe it's one person, but they start to tune in a little bit more to try to figure out what the issues are. And that's your opportunity. It took me probably 2 years to really document and build my case to where I had things to present. I remember the first 6 months, I went through the first custody evaluation, and I was so new into it and I was so fresh, and I feel like they're so dismissive of things that went on in the relationship that, you don't really have a lot to go on. But once you get past that year of co-parenting or counter-parenting, as I call it, then you start having documentation to show that this person is the problem. And that's where the tides can begin to shift, is when you are able to remove yourself from the conflict, from that equation, and showcase through documentation that the other party is the problem. That was kind of the turning point in my case.
So let me tell you a scenario that I've talked about a lot on my live streams, and that is, I represented a father once, and he didn't like the emails that he got from his ex. So he stopped responding. He felt like, he was constantly involved in conflict. And so he removed himself and stopped responding. And what ended up happening was that the judge said, okay, you're not responding, you're not co-parenting. Guess what? Mom gets custody of the children.
Right.
So can you talk to us a little bit about how you remove yourself without putting yourself in a situation like that, where the judge says, yeah, you're not interested in co-parenting at all, and so no rights for you. Does that make sense?
Right. No, absolutely. And I think it's a common scenario. And especially when you are the victim of abuse and attacks and harassment, it's almost a lot of times can be a PTSD reaction to where you just shut down. And you don't want to deal with it. And, I always say there is no rule book for how to, when you have your own personal terrorist assigned to you, which is what I feel happened the day that our divorce paperwork was filed, how is anyone equipped to deal with that? And so, when we're talking about narcissistic personality disorders or sociopaths or borderlines, the general communication style that we are taught is gray rock communication. And the basis is you are so boring that you have the personality of a gray rock, so that they stop looking to you for their feed and their supply, because so many of them really look to this conflict as their drug. And so gray rock communication is a fantastic way to communicate with someone like this if you don't have children. But like you pointed out, if you have children with this person, it's going to backfire on you and it's going to be used against you. And I deal with so many parents who have taken the gray rock communication approach, and it's come back to haunt them, just like your client experienced. I have on my One Mom's Battle YouTube channel, I have a video about yellow rock communication, and it's the same concept as gray rock, where you are as boring as a gray rock, but I tell people, you're not communicating with your ex. You need to take that out of your head. You're communicating with the court. You're communicating with whatever neutral third party it is, or family court professional, whether it's a custody evaluator, whether it's a parenting coordinator, or whether it's the judge. You need to be your authentic, true self and forget that other party is part of the equation. So you don't want to engage in conflict, but you still want to be courteous and businesslike and polite so that it's not used against you. I have something that I refer to as canned responses, which I'm happy to share with anyone. It's actually on my One Mom's Battle Instagram. If you go to the link in my bio, you can download a PDF with 50 different canned responses that can be used. And an example of that would be, your attempt to portray me in a negative light is noted. Another one would be, I don't agree with your portrayal of the events that happened today, but I don't wish to engage in conflict. And so you're communicating, you're shutting it down, but you're not engaging in it to where you could be seen as part of the problem.
I love that. I want to download that, because
yeah, I'll send them to you.
I could use that against a few attorneys I'm dealing with right now.
Right.
That's awesome.
And unfortunately, in your profession, there are a lot of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I've heard, and
Yeah.
I've experienced it. So that is a
Yeah.
wonderful resource, you guys. So go to Tina's Instagram and click on the link in her bio to download those canned responses. Those sound invaluable. I've had so many people, people, in my experience, if they don't know this information, they tend to react.
Right.
Sometimes they react and they get out of line. And then, of course, the email or the text message or whatever it is ends up getting used against them.
Yes.
And, I feel like the best thing is to always pause before you react to some inflammatory.
Absolutely.
Yes. So do you have like any rule of thumb in terms of how long to pause?
In the beginning, I was guilty. I always say, the first 2 years before. So going back to when my therapist said, in 2008, this is what you're dealing with is a narcissist. It took me almost 2 years to connect the dots that the reason that my divorce was so high conflict was because my ex was a narcissist. Even though I had done education, back then there was little, if any, education on high conflict divorces being connected to this type of person. And so I really hadn't connected those dots and realized that this is why my custody battle was so crazy. And so, and I just forgot your question.
That's okay. I forgot it.
Remind me.
I forgot it too.
Okay. But no, I mean, there is the connection between high conflict and narcissist. It is such a high. My guess is if psych evals were done on everybody, the ones who actually can get a diagnosis, which is hard to get, I think the judges would make sense of almost every high conflict custody battle that's in front of them, because it's such it really has a lot of weight.
So, and you touched on something that I want to delve a little more deeply into, and that is this idea of the narcissistic personality disordered person being diagnosed. Does that happen a lot?
No,
it doesn't.
In the beginning of my custody battle, every single time I was in court, and it was a lot. 2012, I was in court 13 times alone just that year.
Gosh.
So about once a month. Back then, I was constantly, every opportunity, I was asking for a psych eval to be ordered. And at the time, he was playing such financial games that the judge wouldn't order it because he said no one has the financial means to actually pay for it. He did. I did not. But at that time, he was being successful in his shell game of finances and money. Now, what I know from sitting in courtrooms from 10 years of family court advocacy is I would never, ever ask for a psych eval as part of my custody evaluation, because first of all, it's nearly impossible to actually get a diagnosis. Most psychologists will say, well, the person has very high narcissistic traits or antisocial or borderline traits, but they won't come right out and diagnose them. I've heard it's a legal liability for them to do that, and so they won't. Whether it's lack of a backbone or whatever it is, I have mixed feelings on the topic, but it is, if you get ordered to do a psych eval, you probably have a 2% chance of getting a solid diagnosis. And the other issue is that a lot of these people are so skilled at impression management and they're so manipulative that they can pass a psych eval. So now you're left holding a piece of paper that costs you $15,000 and it does you absolutely no good in the courtroom. And then the other component to that is, even if you are that, slight percentage that gets a diagnosis, the lack of education behind the bench is, unfortunately, there's zero research on how a narcissist affects a child. There's zero research about how a narcissistic person affects a co-parenting relationship. So now you've got a really expensive piece of paper and a diagnosis, and it doesn't do you any good in the courtroom. I've seen diagnosed antisocials and narcissists get 50-50 custody.
Wow.
So,
Wow. So
yeah.
can a psych eval then still help?
If you are able, my opinion, obviously I'm not an attorney and I'm not a psychologist, I'm not qualified to diagnose anyone, but if you are able to bring in an expert who can testify about what a narcissist, how they can affect a child, and then tie it into your case on, the patterns of behavior that you're documenting or that are prevalent in your case, if you can tie those things together and educate the judge on why your situation is so high conflict and tie it back to that, I have seen it help.
Okay. All right. So, and that leads me to another question I had. And, I've been involved in cases, and I've had clients who've wanted to march right into the courtroom and just pronounce, my ex suffers from narcissistic personality disorder, or they are a narcissist. What are your thoughts on that? Is that wise or not wise?
Don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't do it. No, I've never once, even though I've written 5 books on the topic, I've never once referred to my ex-husband as a narcissist, whether it was in the courtroom or I've been through 2 custody evaluations, minors counsel, numerous CPS reports, dozens of law enforcement interactions. I've never once used that term, and I could never recommend that anyone else does either. Unless you have a firm diagnosis, I instead have always preferred to focus on patterns of behavior, specifically the ones that affect my kids. I just find that even with everything we know about domestic violence, the judge and evaluators, they really like to separate that. Great, that was between you two, and they don't know you from anyone else. They don't know that this other person is the bad person or the toxic person. And so in their minds, it could have just very well been a toxic relationship. And so until it affects the kids, they don't really pay attention to it. So my strategy and goal has always been to showcase patterns of behavior related to my ex-husband and how that affected my kids.
And can you give examples, Tina, of the types of evidence you used to demonstrate those patterns of behavior?
Yeah, so very early on, I fought to have my kids in therapy. When the relationship ended, my daughters were 2 and 4, so they were really little. And some play therapists won't engage with children of that age, but there are some out there who will. And one of the biggest challenges has been finding therapists who are skilled and qualified in domestic violence and these types of people, so that over time they can see what you're up against. And so, and I will say it didn't really start off as a strategy. It really came naturally to me, but I have many clients who have used it as a strategy. And for me, it was my daughters would come home and they would say, Dad was calling you bad names. My name is Tina. My ex-husband nicknamed me T-Rex for the courtroom. He apparently thought I was a big scary dinosaur. And so my daughters would come home in tears and they would say, Dad was calling you T-Rex this weekend. And while that seems so, insignificant in the big picture of things, I would tell them, it doesn't hurt my feelings. I know my truth. My truth is that my name is Tina. I'm sorry that your dad was saying that to you, and I can see that upsets you. So I would validate that. And then I would say, and I don't really know how to respond to you. So let's wait until Tuesday night when we go to see Miss Sue, who was their therapist. And let's talk to Miss Sue about it. And let's ask her, how you can handle that in the future if it's something that upsets you. And so I would table it with my daughters, and when we would go in for their therapy, I would say to the therapist, can I have a minute of your time? This is what happened. This is how I responded to them. I'm a sponge. I will take whatever advice you tell me on in the future. How do I react to something like this? It's, 5-year-old behavior from a 40-year-old man. And there's no rule book. I'm not equipped for this. So I value your expertise, and I value you in guiding my daughters on how they handle this. And what that does, what I found was that it emotionally hooked the therapist into our situation. It showed her that I was acting in the best interest of my daughters. I wasn't trying to engage him in conflict. I was very much dumbfounded and perplexed by his behavior and how he was involving our daughters. And it gave, it gave her an opportunity to talk to them and live, with them without me in the picture, because they would go in on their own and recount these things. But it gave her, I was planting seeds of things that I was experiencing and they were experiencing, and then looking to her for help.
Did the therapist testify? Did you go to trial, or how did your case get resolved?
So she didn't want to testify, and that was really hard for me to hear. Now I understand why. A lot of times if a therapist is put on the stand willingly, it can be seen as a bias, that they are aligned with you, that they are trying to oust the other parent. And so her stance was, you can subpoena me. I would prefer to do it that way. I don't want to willingly show up because that could show a bias. She did write out on one occasion, she did write a declaration for me. But the other side did try to use that and get my daughters to have to switch therapy. So I can understand her hesitation all the way along, because what she feared would happen, the other side did try to use that.
I've had that experience quite a lot with therapists, who are there for the children and
Right.
they're advocates, but then when it comes time for trial, they're reluctant.
Right.
And
Right.
Sometimes they're the linchpin, as far as I'm concerned. They're the people who could turn the case.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, what several therapists along the way have said, subpoena me. I will gladly come in and share my opinions and my experiences, but I don't want to do it willingly because it's going to look like I'm on your side.
Got it.
And they were truly advocates for my kids, and I respect that. But at the time, I was frustrated and I was angry, and I remember saying to a friend, she doesn't have a backbone. How can she hear and see all of these things that have been happening for 2 years, and my little girls are depending on her to be a voice, yet she won't go to bat for them? Back then I was actually angry, and now I get it. And so I have a different perspective from watching other people's cases.
That's, it's interesting, because we just had a case in my office where we had to subpoena a mental health professional who was the advocate for the child, but she wouldn't go without subpoena. And once we subpoenaed her and got her on the stand, then she said what she needed to say, and the judge really listened to it. So, I appreciate your perspective, because that's, not something I'd considered before. So that's really, really good. I find the same thing with teachers. Did you ever, want teachers involved?
They don't want to be involved.
Yes,
that's one thing I have found is not only do they not want to be involved, but the school system doesn't want them to be involved. And, I get it. A lot of times what I share with people is sitting in court as an observer. If I'm just there without anyone, without watching a specific case, and I see two people ping-ponging back and forth, he said, she said, there are times I leave the courtroom and I go, gosh, I wouldn't know who to believe in that situation. And I would probably do exactly what the judge did and order 50-50 custody, because I wouldn't have known who to believe. And at least, in my opinion, the kids will have 50% chance to turn out okay. And I use that when I'm thinking about teachers or anyone else who's involved in any capacity. They don't know you, they don't know the other party. And even if they do, they're there to be an advocate for your children in a classroom setting. And so, can they be subpoenaed? Absolutely. And have I seen them have an impact on a case? Yes. I know from my own. I actually have an experience with one of my daughter's preschool teachers where she willingly wrote a declaration, and that had to do with the differences in my daughter when she came to preschool after his weekend versus mine, just my parenting time. And so, she really had an impact on the case without coming in as a witness, but I have to believe she had something in her past that triggered her. Whether it was my ex-husband triggering her, reminding her of her dad. I feel like the people who are willing to get involved have had some type of experience that they wish someone would have been a voice for them.
Okay, so that's really great information. And Turtle Beach Babe is saying, "Oh my word, thank you for this topic." And let's see, Tenacious Warrior is saying, "I was a teacher and never wanted to be involved. It really puts a lot of strain on the student and causes a trust issue between you and the student."
Right.
So you touched on this a little bit ago, but I want to talk more about that, and that is the issue of judges. And I know that, most judges are out there, they're doing their best, but it seems like there's just not a lot of education in terms of narcissistic personality disorder. And I feel like, and I'm in front of some really good judges, but I feel like a lot of times, I don't know. I feel like they're resistant to.
Right.
What's your experience with judges and narcissistic personality disorder, and how do you think they can be educated more about this?
Right. It's hard. And like I said, when I sit in court and watch people ping pong back and forth, and I try to put myself in the judge's shoes. And, and I feel like with your profession, with my profession, with their profession, you hear and see the worst side of humanity. And I work very hard every day not to be calloused by it. I think the technical term is compassion fatigue, but do I think that most judges probably suffer from that? Yeah. And the hard part is when I do sit in court, I've sat in court and I've heard of a 1.5-year-old little boy who was strangled and ended up in ICU, or a 6-year-old little girl who was raped by her father.
Oh my God.
And so when you hear those stories and then my case comes in front of you, or a lot of these other cases that are mainly emotional abuse or psychological abuse, I feel like our brain starts to go, well, yeah, that's bad, but it's not as bad as this, and like I said, I work every day to look at each case and as a unique case, and every child is suffering, no matter whether it's emotional abuse, whether it's psychological abuse, or those extreme cases. I give a lot of compassion and weight to every case, because if a child is suffering, a child is suffering. But I don't, I feel like judges are overburdened. The reality is they have cases just filtering through. It's like cattle. I've always said it would take me longer to go adopt a puppy at my local shelter than it would for a judge to decide the fate of my child. And that's so wrong, but it's so true. And sadly, I do think that profession in general, family judges, there's a high rate of narcissism in that segment.
Really? Oh, wow.
I think in any profession that is, high up, CEOs, attorney profession, judges, anybody in positions of power, you tend to see more narcissism. And so I feel that there are some judges that become calloused to the issues because it so closely represents who they are, maybe at a core level. And that's unfortunate. I do believe there are a lot of judges who are just merely uneducated, and they haven't connected the dots, similar to what I said in the beginning was, my therapist had said, this is what you're dealing with is narcissism. But it took me 2 years into my case to connect the dots and go, oh, this is why it's so high conflict. And I feel like for some judges, it is a matter of educating them on red flags. Are people's words and actions in alignment? And if they aren't, you need to pay more attention to that case. And that's a big part of what I do, is trying to educate family court professionals, specifically judges, on these high conflict personalities and high conflict divorces and custody cases, because there is an absolute direct connection. And so we do something called Educate Your Judge, where we send packets anonymously. People make a donation to my organization. I send out a packet that has absolutely no ties to their case, and it's merely to educate the judge on what to look for. I use my own story as an example, and I say, hey, Mr. Judge, your name has come across my desk, and I welcome the opportunity to share my journey through the family court system and, my experience and what I've found over the years to help you recognize these cases that are in front of you.
Oh, that's great. That's really great. We're going to have to talk about that after when we get offline.
It's quite a project, yeah. I'll tell you that.
I bet it is.
Yeah.
I bet it is. Do you have suggestions for people who want to attempt to educate their judges in their cases? I mean, do you need to have an expert to educate?
That's the hard part is, there are, first of all, like we said, it's hard to get a diagnosis, as you know, and then, if you do get a diagnosis, then it's finding an expert who can actually testify as to what that diagnosis means for your kids. And so again, I prefer to focus on patterns of behavior. Okay. With my ex-husband, it was neglecting the kids. It was, his words and his actions didn't line up. He said he wanted to be a hands-on dad, but he would pick the girls up and drop them straight off at the gym daycare so he could go work out and drink beer at the gym bar, which is kind of irony there. But, all of those things that, this is what he said, but then he failed to show up for his custody time. He was late to his custody time. And, I do documentation webinars, and one of the things I share is that I documented everything, every single thing. It was like a full-time job for me. And the reality is that probably 1 to 2% of what I documented has ever been seen by anybody, but I believe it was that 1 or 2% that actually protected my kids. So would I go back and do that as a full-time job again? Yeah, half of my garage is taken up with family court files and paperwork and documentation, but it was worth it because today my girls are safe.
They're safe, and do you feel like you want to share with everybody what just happened?
Yeah. So 10 years, 2 months, and 28 days worth of family court, and I successfully terminated my ex-husband's parental rights, which I have been told is a nearly impossible task in California. We did that in August. And then I've been remarried for 6 years with my husband for almost 10. And he adopted my daughters a week ago. So we are, thank you. We are completely done. And I'm still absorbing, everything that means. It means I can go to my P.O. box without having a panic attack that I'm going to get served with court paperwork. It means that we can run into him in public and he has absolutely no power over us anymore. It's been quite a journey, but we survived it.
You're getting little hearts. So on the chat. So documentation, this is something that I struggle with as an attorney, especially with people who are really great at documentation. And they bring to me piles of stuff, text messages, emails, photographs, could be letters from people, and I know there are some really good people in this, chat and in this group who they document really well.
Right.
How do you narrow down, or how did you narrow down the most powerful pieces of documentation that you collected over the years?
I focus on patterns of
Okay.
behavior. In my case, what you find with a lot of these high conflict individuals is that there are addiction issues, whether it's work, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol. In my ex-husband's case, it was alcoholism. And so, I found the patterns of behavior that were affecting my daughters. And it took me a while to really figure out what those patterns of behaviors are. And that's one of the things I work with people on. My coaching clients, consulting clients is, profiling your ex, almost like the FBI would profile a criminal, is a good way to describe it, and figuring out, what their triggers are, what their buttons are, how, what do you know about them and their background that your attorney can push that button on the stand and get them to drop their mask. Or in my case with my ex-husband's alcoholism, he was either drinking or wanting to drink or recovering from drinking too much. And so those patterns over time, I could start to show, he showed up to a visit and he appeared to be hungover. He violated court orders because he wasn't supposed to drink. And, 90% of the time I couldn't prove that he was, but the few times that I was able to prove that he was drinking around the girls really had an impact on my case. So I think it's different for everybody's case, depending on what the patterns of behavior is, abuse or neglect or rage or anger issues. There's so many different variations.
I see. Do you have like some sort? I'm just, if you don't already, but I'm asking if you do. Do you have a checklist on the different categories of patterns of behaviors? Is this something you offer as part of your programs?
I do. I do a documentation webinar once a
Okay.
month, and I help people create the exact documentation system that I use. It's an hour-long webinar. Too much to go into detail here, but I walk people through, how to create a timeline of your case, how to figure out what the patterns of behavior are for your specific case, and then how to present those. Because as the attorney, I can empathize. I understand, when somebody just almost emotionally vomits on you because they don't know how to articulate it, how do you make sense of it? You haven't walked in their footsteps or lived their life. And so getting them prepared so they can come in and present it to you, so then you can go in and be their voice and their advocate in that courtroom, is so important. And I have a diagnosis of complex PTSD, so I get it, and I can help people all day long with their own cases. But if you tell me I have to present my case in 20 minutes, it's going to spin me. And so, but helping other people figure out how to present their cases for their attorney, and to help them articulate what the issues is something that I love to do.
And so, I mean, that sounds really valuable, that webinar. How can people sign up for that?
If you go to my website, which is onemomsbattle.com, at the top, one of the tabs is the webinars, and you can just click on it and sign it up. I do a few different webinars every month, and the documentation webinar is one that I consistently do every month.
Okay, that sounds really good. So you guys, if you're wondering about how you can document better and, paint those patterns of behavior effectively. I haven't taken it. I feel like I need to, but I would recommend.
I'll send it to you.
Okay, yeah, please. Please
Yeah,
do. I mean,
yeah.
I feel like you guys, we all need to take this webinar to understand more about how to build our cases. So, there's a lot of people on here who, in the chat, I'm just watching the comments scroll, and it seems like a lot of people have an understanding of what narcissistic personality disorder is and means, but I feel like maybe we've, or I have skipped over, some of the basics. And that is, what if somebody is questioning, what's going on in my life? What's going on in this relationship What is this that I'm experiencing? Can you just, you probably could just rattle off some of the signs and symptoms of a person who is affected by narcissistic personality disorder?
Right. So, one of the things that my therapist told me early on is that it takes a full year and a half to really see, of being with someone day in and day out, to see those red flags and the issues that would tend to point towards a personality disorder. But the general ones are lack of empathy. And it's hard because, I know with my ex-husband, he was so skilled at impression management. I posted something yesterday that said, somebody being ordered to anger management classes, it's actually a joke. Most of them can teach anger management classes. They know how to control their anger. They know how to, keep that mask on until they're behind closed doors, whether it's anger, whatever it is. They are very skilled at navigating that and impressing people. So really, lack of empathy. I remember one example. We had been together for about a year and a half, and my mom died, and obviously it shook me tremendously, even though she and I didn't have a close relationship, and I had been raised by my dad. And my ex-husband didn't, he knew my mom had just died. He took extra long coming home. He stopped for pizza on the way home. And then when I was fetal position on the couch crying, he said, "I don't understand why you're so upset. You weren't even that close to her."
Wow.
And it was my mom. Yeah. But that was one of my first major red flags, is emotions made him so uncomfortable. And in situations like that, if I was emotional, if I was crying, he would say, "You're so sensitive, you're so emotional, are you bipolar?" And no, I'm just human, But now looking back, that lack of empathy is the, hallmark characteristic of this type of person.
Okay, that's really, really excellent. People are saying, "I love you, love Tina, thumbs up, prayer hands." So really, really good information. So I'm going to start winding it down because I know Tina has a date with her family pretty soon. I want to be respectful of her time. I just have a couple other questions. And I read, I think it was on your Amazon author page, Tina, where it says, "Tina believes the courts have lost sight of their primary focus, which should be the best interest of the child. She believes instead courts are focusing too heavily on parental rights." Can you explain a little more about what you mean when you say that?
Sure. And it's a hard, I get a lot of hate mail from, I'm going to be brutally honest here, a lot of hate mail from dads and fathers' rights groups who accuse me of being very pro-mom. And I always say, I will never align with either gender. I will never belong to a mother's rights group, and I'll never belong to a father's rights group, because for me, I'm pro-child. My mom was not the healthier of my two parents. And so when my dad was 19 years old, he got custody of me. I was only 6 months old. And that was the best decision for me as a child. That was the court deciding in a pro-child fashion. There's been such an uprising in fathers' rights groups, and I'll probably get a lot of hate mail for this. But the reality is, I feel like it's done a tremendous amount of damage to the family court system, because it pits two genders against one against the other. And I think that's where the courts have lost sight. That's not what it should be about. I don't care what your gender is. My care is for children, because I was one of those children who grew up in the family court system. And I'm incredibly thankful that I was placed with my dad, because I think my life would have turned out very differently had I been raised by my mom, who had mental health issues and addiction issues. And so the courts have I do feel that they tend to align depending on which judge, one gender or the other, there's a lot of bias that I see in the court system depending on the judge. And I think getting back to what is truly in the best interest of the kids. And I'm not an advocate for 50-50 parenting, at young ages, even with two healthy parents, because I know what it's like to travel for work and live out of a suitcase. And I think that's a horrible life for a child to lead. And
okay, that's
yeah.
that's in alignment with what I talk about a lot. People ask me about mother's rights versus father's rights, and I say that we should be focusing on the children's rights, and what is
Absolutely.
it's the best interest of the children all the way for me all the time.
Right.
And just because, I guess I don't know, I don't know if you want to call it your organization or One Mom's Battle,
Right.
men are not the only ones who suffer from narcissistic personality disorder. Is that right?
Absolutely
Yeah.
not. We see NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. It's mainly men who have it, but in that same category of disorders, borderline, we see a lot of women who have that, and that can be equally damaging to children. I titled my blog One Mom's Battle when I first started out because at the time I truly felt like I was the only person going through this in the world. I really did. And I started my blog for my friends and family to follow along with. I had no idea that my blog would be thrust into the spotlight and receive the attention that it's received. I'd probably give it a different name if I could go back and do it all over again. But no, it affects both genders. And again, my mission is pro-child.
Okay, that's awesome. So do you have different chapters of One Mom's Battle in different states?
So we used to do that. It did become somewhat of a liability because it's really difficult for us to screen people.
Okay.
We do have little groups that have formed in different areas, kind of organically. Moms going to support each other for court, or again, it tends to be more women in my group, but we do have a lot of fantastic men as well. But yeah, there are some organic groups that have formed. I know you have one there in Arizona, which is where I originally met you many years
Yep.
ago. But no, we've kind of tapered down on those a little bit.
Okay, so before I have you tell everybody how they can find you, we've already talked about the webinar that everybody's going to take, including me.
Yeah.
And we've talked about the canned responses, which are amazing. But I want to just tell you that people are saying I've been following One Mom's Battle for a few years now. I'm so happy she's on your show, Wendy. Tina, Wendy, this is one of the best interviews yet. Tina's fantastic. We get like
Aw.
5 purple hearts, which is awesome. So people are loving you, Tina. Keep doing the good work that you're doing. But please, can you
Thank you.
tell people? I mean, I'm intrigued by the lemonade, making lemonade out of lemons that life hands you. But just tell us what you're doing right now and how people can learn more from you, Tina.
Yeah, my blog or my website is onemomsbattle.com. We have a very active Facebook page. I think there's almost 50,000 people on our Facebook page now, which is One Mom's Battle. You can find us on Instagram under One Mom's Battle. I have a YouTube channel. I do retreats once a year or twice a year. Next year, I have one in Hilton Head, South Carolina in November of 2020, and one here in California in February. So just a few months away. And I have a private online forum called thelemonadeclub.com. You can sign up and join that there. And then all of my books are available on Amazon.
And if there's one book if somebody has not read any of your books, if there's one book that you would recommend they start with, what would that be?
The Narc Decoder, because it helps so much with communication. It's so easy to be triggered by these attacking, harassing emails that you get. And so if you can break it down and, it's humor, it's finding humor in the darkness, which I use a lot of examples from my ex-husband's actual emails, and then I decode them into what they actually mean. And then I tell how I would respond or how I did respond. And then I share lots of examples of emails that other people within my group have received. And then we decode them to kind of find humor and try to make sense of the madness.
That sounds awesome. So that's something else I have to put on my reading list, my wish list. That's awesome. So thank you so much, Tina. It's been wonderful having you, and I hope it's not the last time. And you guys, for all of you out there listening, yes, go to onemomsbattle.com. Look at all the resources that Tina has to offer. She's valuable. I hope this really gave you some good information. She answered some of the questions that I don't feel like I'm qualified to answer. So we heard it here from the expert, you guys. So, but I will be back next week. And until then, remember to keep on trucking, you guys, and get out there and command the courtroom. We'll see you next week. Bye.